Thanks for coming in, Ray. We appreciate it. Well, why don't we go ahead and first just, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay, well, I was doing that.
Yeah.
Well, I grew up on the north edge of Pearland, born and raised in a 5-mile radius, really the first 58 years of my life, lived in a 5-mile radius. Here's my barefoot walking to school through the snow story. My dad was an entrepreneur, had a gas station in 1958, an Amoco gas station. The premium was so pure you could burn it in Coleman lanterns, 100% octane. He built boat sheds out back, rented boat stalls out. They're on Telephone Road, half a mile north of Pearland. Got in the RV business in 1966. He decided to expand from his gas station business, but we lived in one of the houses. He would build a house, live in it for a while, build another house. They bought 10 acres there in 1948. Move into that house and rent the first house. I did that 3 times. He had rental income, had boat shed income. When I was 5 years old, I got on the school bus to go to kindergarten at my dad's gas station. I would come home in the afternoon. I would get off the school bus at my dad's gas station and stay there, work with him, and put a red shop rag in my back pocket. And the only thing I could do back then, gas stations were full service. They didn't have a canopy. You gassed up, you checked the air and tires, you wiped the windshields, you checked the oil radiator. Only thing I could do was sweep the concrete apron when I was 5. So I literally, of course, I guess is that against child labor laws? Probably wasn't back then. But literally grew up in an entrepreneurial family. Graduated from high school on the lower side of Houston there, from Ross Sterling. And then when I graduated when I was 17, we moved into Pearland, about 4 miles south of where I was born. So that's why I say I've lived in a 5-mile radius 58 years. Went to Alvin Junior College when I got out of high school. That's where I met Brenda. My wife grew up in Nederland, over on the east side of the district. She graduated in 74. She came to Alvin Junior College where I met her. We dated for 2 years. She lived in League City. So I tell everybody I've got the widest roots because she was from the east part of the district. I grew up on the western county, and we met in the middle in Galveston County. She lived in League City on Newport Boulevard. Dated for 2 years. I lived in Pearland. She lived in League City, and we got married in 76. Just a little background on me. I was going to go to law school. Both her and I graduated from the University of Houston at Clear Lake City. Mm-hmm. That's where we have our degrees. I have a degree in business, working at my parents' camper business, the RV business, selling RVs. And what I tell everybody, TJ, is that God has a sense. We were going to wait 5 years to have children. Mm-hmm. Tell everybody that God has a sense of humor because we were married 11 months, 3 weeks, and 1 day, and Miss Kristen Nicole was born. Turned out I couldn't go to law school because back then it was an all-day thing, and I had to keep working. I literally finished up, by the way, my U of H degree at night, 12 hours, my last semester, 12 hours last year, my last 2 semesters. I took classes on Monday night, Tuesday night, Wednesday night, and Thursday night, 4 3-hour classes. I worked 45 hours a week. I worked Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday because the camper business was open on Saturdays, 8 to 5. And I took off on Wednesday to keep Kristen, our firstborn, while Brenda finished up her teaching degree. She went to U of H at Clear Lake, took 9 hours on Wednesdays. I would come home from work, the camper business. I would run through the shower real quick if I needed to. I'd go to class at 6 o'clock, 6 to 9. I'd come home, eat a quick dinner. I'd go to bed at 10. I'm an early riser. I'd rather do my studying like at 3 or 4 in the morning. I don't want to stay up till 1 or 2 in the morning. Let me go to bed, get 4 or 5 hours sleep, get up 2 or 3 cups of coffee, I'm good to go. Literally would do my studying early in the morning, back at the camper business, 8 o'clock. I literally got my college degree that way.
Wow.
When my kids, our air conditioning company, eventually we got started that. It did well. My kids were going to go to college. I said, look, I recommend y'all go to U of H, like your mom and I did. Started Alvin Junior College if you want to, or San Jack. And we'll give you a car, we'll pay for your tuition, your undergrad degree, we'll pay for your books, we'll give you a car, we'll give you a gasoline car, we'll pay for your vehicle insurance. You have to get a part-time job. And they would look at me, Ebert, and they would say, Dad, you don't realize how hard that is to have a part-time job in college. And Patrick, I'd reach in my pocket, pull out a dime, and I'd say, here's a dime, go find a phone booth, call somebody that cares. And you know what they would say? What's a phone booth? Hey, don't tell me how hard it is. Why, when I was your age, we had a baby on the ground and all that kind of stuff. Didn't want to work at my parents' camper business forever. Wanted to start a company, and my wife's father-in-law said, why don't you start an air conditioning company? Always be a need for it on the Gulf Coast. I didn't know the first thing about air conditioning, Patrick. I went back to Alvin Junior College and took refrigeration and air conditioning courses. Just too stupid to know you're not supposed to be able to do it that way. And I hung out my shingle. Yesterday I couldn't spell AC, and today I R1. It was hard. Let me just tell you. Brenda didn't work outside the home the first 10 years of our married life. We wanted her to stay home with the kids, give them a good foundation, a good start. And I can tell you, I had created, by the way, one job.
Yours.
Mine. And I took every service call I could. My kids, were RVers, grew up in mom and dad's RV. To this day, I have a 40-foot fifth wheel, which I stayed in Austin, by the way, during the legislative session. Some people rented, hotel rooms or rented apartments. Not me. A lot cheaper to stay in an RV. But anyway, I was be packed and ready to go on vacation. And the kids will tell you about times when my phone would ring. One of my customers say my air conditioner's broken. Is there any way you can come like Friday? And it didn't matter, nights, weekends, holidays, hot, cold, early, late. I took every service call I could to grow that business. Word got around. We literally put flyers on doors of houses, which you had to do, which we did. You ready for this? On an IBM Selectric typewriter. And we would have to go to the copy business and copy them, pay somebody to copy them, and we'd go put on doors. Word got around, business grew. I hired another technician. I had created 2 jobs. It grew and grew and grew. We hired installers, we hired more technicians, grew up to about 10 is usually our max. It varies in the summertime because it's a very seasonal business. But I literally grew my business from scratch. When people ask me why I'm so conservative or business-minded or understand my area, it's because I grew up here and built my business from the ground up. Now, you can tell by my expanding girth, I don't get in those hot attics much anymore. But that's kind of my business background. I'm a deacon at First Baptist Church in Pearland. Brenda went to teaching school in 1987. She's a 4th grade teacher. She actually taught the first year in Friendswood, believe it or not, and the last 25 in Pearland. So we're just local working folks, just like y'all.
To get into the questions, there are certain topics we can cover that the federal government plays a bigger role in on local issues. One of those is one that's still fresh on the mind of a lot of folks from after Hurricane Ike in 2008, and that's a surge protection system that's been dubbed the Ike Dike. And I just, the concept itself, where do you stand on the concept itself and the federal role that would play? Because obviously a project of that size, that magnitude, it's going to have a whole lot of federal involvement, not just funding, but also mechanisms to get it going.
Right, absolutely. To my knowledge, and I don't know, I'll just say that I'm the only one that I know for a fact. Of course, as you know, from the original primary, there was 9 candidates. And then, of course, the runoff, and now the general. They held public hearings. Was it up in city council chambers? I went to and sat in on with some people trying to begin to learn about it. I don't know if my opponent in this race, to my knowledge, none of the other ones did from the primary or the runoff. But I'm a learner. I'm a listener. You learn that being in business. Well, sometimes I think you learn that having 3 kids. But I went and sat in and listened. I also went, there was a breakfast club that meets at Fishtails on Sunday mornings. I forget what it's called.
It is the Galveston, the breakfast, the coffee club.
Coffee club.
Yeah, and sat in and listened to learn, but I'm listening and learning. I've been talking to the mayor, I've been talking to one of the city council members, and I'm saying, look, I need for you to school me, to bring me up to speed, tell me what y'all's discussion was, keep me apprised of meetings, let me know what that discussion is saying. If you can give me, an outline, or if you get information on it, email it to me. So I'm paying a lot of close attention to it because I think it's a discussion we're going to have. And yes, the federal government is going to have to get involved with something of that magnitude.
From what you've learned so far, how big of a role is the federal government going to have to play on the funding side of things?
It's hard for me to know, TJ. I haven't looked at all the numbers, don't really know what the scope is. I understand the concept and the principle, and it's something that needs to be examined. Look, Texas is a leader in this nation. Petro-Texas Chemical Complex that's in our area. Man, if they had done a humongous, bigger push, let's say water and destruction in some of the chemical plants, our whole nation would have suffered. So that's why I think the federal government, energy is critical to our national security.
Mm-hmm.
And so how big is that? What does that look like? I mean, I think that has to be determined.
Another federal issue, I'm sure you heard when you met with the coffee club then, and talking with the mayor, is the issue of public housing, particularly on the island. That has been a bone of contention with folks. As if elected, as the congressman for this area, if you were in office at the time when this was going on, what type of role you think you would have taken on behalf of, or the city, or HUD, or what role will you play there? And also, where do you see it from now going forward if elected?
Well, that's a real easy answer for me. I'm a representative. That's what I did. That's what I did in Pearland City Council. That's what I do in the state legislature. I represent my constituents. In fact, I get dinged by some because I got off the speaker's list of supporting him when my district said we don't want you to vote for Joe Strauss, or pledge to Joe Strauss more appropriately. I called him and had him take me off. And my conversation with him was, Mr. Speaker, I represent my constituents. I would represent this area, this district. And so that's a conversation that would be had with the city council members, with the citizens. I don't represent HUD. I don't represent the federal government. I want to be a representative of the people. So that would be something that we would determine if the majority of my constituents are against something or for something. Then we said, I'm no stranger to this. Town halls, I held town halls in the state legislature. I've held town halls in this race. Did I mention that being an air conditioning contractor and Republican activist has been a really good training ground for getting to know people? You bet.
On that, how much of the issue have you followed as it was going on here?
I haven't followed the dollars and the cents. I think there was 500 homes demolished. They want to build back 800 homes, which to me makes no sense, quite frankly, But I haven't followed all of the dollars, the exact numbers, or the discussion. So I haven't been able to follow a whole lot of it.
Even with that, what you is that where you, as we go forward now, and you talk about town hall meetings and stuff, but obviously is what can be done as the congressman on the federal level to advocate for what folks in the community want to be able to do. I mean, what beyond that?
Right. Well, that's a good word, advocate, because that's exactly how I view my role. As I understand it, there was a time when the funding dried up. They had to either use the money or lose it. Is that right? Patrick?
Well,
I'm not sure that's the case. He would probably know that better than I would. But
the deal was that in order to get funding to repair infrastructure, they had to agree to abide by the provisions of the Fair Housing Act, and rebuilding those housing units was part of that deal. And, you know, immediately after the storm, the city said yes to a lot of federal money. So the housing dollars were tied to those other dollars.
So when they demolished those, was it 500 something homes? Does that sound right?
569.
69 units.
Okay.
Mhm.
Did they know that part of that Fair Housing Act, that you
Yes.
call it, that they were going to have to come back and build, and I haven't run those numbers, but almost a third, if not more than a third more?
They
Almost
knew that they would
50%.
have to replace them. The higher number was one of the ways to do that was to come back and build mixed income units. And in that kind of deal, you get credit, a developer would get credit for 40% public housing units, 20% tax credit units, 40% market units.
Okay.
So the higher number reflects the fact that you're building more units just to get to the number that count toward public housing.
Right. And that sounds, just from what little I know about it, like one of those federal programs that has strings attached that you better be thoroughly familiar with before you sign on the dotted line. And seems indicative, to me, it seems indicative of where we are, why we are where we are, that it doesn't make sense. And we're gonna wind up spending more money than we otherwise might have spent. And if my citizens, my constituents are against it, then I will take steps necessary to fight for them.
While Johnson Space Center itself doesn't sit in the district itself any longer, obviously a large part of our population, particularly the north part of this county, as well as UTMB works with NASA. And so where do you see NASA's role, particularly Johnson Space Center,
Sure.
in manned space flight, and what would you be doing if elected in DC to
Sure.
continue that vision?
You bet, fighting for NASA. NASA is critical. I mentioned earlier about the Petrotex chemical complex being important for national security because of the energy supply. Y'all know this, in military terms, you know, if you're gonna wage a war militarily, or maybe even some other factions, whoever has the high ground has the upper hand. Well, there is no other there's no higher ground than space. And I think that for our national security, that we ought to maintain a strong presence in space. This thing that we have to hitch a ride with the Russians is crazy. Congressman Olson had a letter, and I've tried to bone up on as much of this as I can. And I forget exactly, there was 3 other congressmen that signed on where they sent a letter saying that, quite frankly, we need a long-term plan for NASA. We need to keep NASA here. We need to fund NASA. And I'm sorry I can't tell you all of the inventions and all of the business concepts that have come out of NASA, but there's been quite a number of things that we have benefited by, not just militarily, but from a business standpoint, from a product standpoint, from a technology standpoint. I would fight to keep NASA here and funded. But more than that, I agree with Olson's, one of the major tenets of his letter, as I recall, was that we needed a long-term plan, bipartisanship, buy-in, which I think we'll have, and we should keep NASA here. The fact that President Obama, and let me just cut to the chase, the guy that my opponent Lamson endorsed, has chosen to send a space shuttle to bypass Texas for a space shuttle. You know, what was the first words when we landed on the moon? Houston, you know? I mean, the fact that Houston, Texas in this area has played such a crucial role, and yet Obama and the administration seems to have a target on our back and has denied us one of the shuttles, except for the mock-up, and I was there when it came in, is a travesty. I mean, I can't put it any other way. We need NASA. We need for it to stay here. Now, having said that, they need a clear vision. I've talked with some people at NASA, and some of them feel like, you know, there's so much uncertainty that they don't have a clear directive or a clear direction. We need an administration and a program based partly in national security that would make that a long-term reality. I can't be any clearer than that.
It would seem then you would support legislation that's been introduced several times, it keeps getting stalled, that would say no longer are we going to fund NASA on a year-by-year basis.
Yeah,
we're going to put the funding in for a 10-year run.
I mean, it needs a long-term plan.
Mm-hmm.
And look, if we can convince enough of our colleagues that from a national security standpoint, this is crucial. You know, do you think the Russians are really our friends? Do you think the Chinese are our friends? Do you think that if we had a need to get up and take care of some of our satellites or other needs in space, that they're really going to be there for us? Come on.
Along that lines, how about the move to commercial? SpaceX, its first cargo launch, a lot of attention to the guy who did the balloon skydiving jump for Red Bull. It was the deal for, but where do you see it as a hybrid of more commercialism taking the lead, and NASA itself as a kind of a support mechanism? Obviously, commercial has been involved with Boeing, Lockheed Martin, and I, but
Right.
more where commercial's taking the lead in pushing things forward.
Well, I think we have a good partnership, if you will, between commercial interest and our federal government. That is, that business drives our nation's economy, should, unlike the present administration that thinks government is the answer. And I have to say that, you know, again, go back to Obama, because it seems like he's intent on making a government program take care of everything, whether you're bailing out this company, and you think tax and spend is the answer. You bet, commercial business, let them get in there, let them apply that American entrepreneurialism, and they'll do a good job. One of the things I like to say, TJ, is, when I've been on the stump, is to say the things that make America great are the things that America makes. We have a stable, safe energy supply, and I think NASA can play a role in that. We've got satellites up in air. There is a legitimate national security interest here. Yes, whenever possible, the federal government can hire commercial contractors. I think that's a good partnership. So I see that as a viable role.
You mentioned in there about energy issues.
Yes, sir.
Like that was the next question, actually. For the first time in a very long time, the U.S. is actually exporting oil. But there are still concerns, just not the last election cycle, about opening up more federal lands, for example, for drilling, more easier regulations on offshore drilling.
Right.
You know, what should be federal policy as far as oil exploration and research and refining?
Member of the Environmental Reg Committee, my first term in the Texas House, a small business owner, of course. Texas is now to natural gas what Saudi Arabia is to oil. We have unbelievable gas reserves. The federal government is out of control when it comes to environmental regulations, particularly the EPA. TJ, I fought the EPA and the Environmental Reg Committee. Al Armendariz, who wound up being this, who back then was an activist, environmentalist activist, who wound up becoming the Regional 6 head of the EPA. He's the guy that the video came out on that said crucified the first 5 companies. I don't know if y'all saw that. And he said they need to treat the oil companies like the Romans did when they invaded a country. They crucified the first 5 guys they found, and everybody else fell in line. That was his position against Texas businesses, and I took him to task in a public hearing over some things he said that just weren't accurate. I believe the intent of the Clean Air Act is good. None of us business owners, I dare say that if you went to any of these chemical refineries or these energy plants, none of their administrators or their executives wake up every morning and say, how can we make the air or the water dirtier for our kids? I got kids and grandkids, you know. I own a business. I want a good, clean environment, but I want commonsensical regulations too. The Speaker of the House appointed me to the not only the Environmental Reg Committee in my first term, but the Energy Council. Energy Council is a group of 11 energy producing states, 4 Canadian provinces, and Venezuela. And we would travel around the country and hold conferences every quarter, I think it was, or it might have been twice a year, where we would discuss best energy policies, best environmental practices, best legislative intent, and we would discuss all kinds of things in the Energy Council, you know, in terms of green energy, solar energy, you know, wind energy, battery, the latest things. We have an EPA that's promulgating rules from Washington. When I went up there and sat in Washington, D.C. in a committee hearing, and I'm one of those rare state reps that when I fly out of town, especially on the taxpayer's dime, to learn from other legislatures and to talk about best practices and best energy policy, I actually go to the meetings. I don't take golf clubs. I don't take swim gear. I go to the meetings. But I sat in and heard the EPA with my own ears say that they wanted to permit farms with 200 head of cattle, pigs, horses, sheep, goats, whatever, 200 head and up because of global warming, greenhouse gases, methane gas in particular. And that the average permit price per farm was $26,500 per farm, and they'd done the math based on the number of farms across the country. It would bring $600 million revenue stream, they called it. And I'm sitting there, and then I'm back in my taxi, I'm driving back to the airport, and first of all, I couldn't believe my ears they want to permit farms because of methane gas. I'm thinking, you know, cows and animals eat stuff, and, you know, I'm just thinking, you know. And so I'm driving back and I go by this EPA building and in the back of this taxi and I'm looking at this and I'm going, it is huge. It's massive. And it's like, I don't know, 2 or 3 blocks long as I remember. It's like 2 or 3, maybe 4 stories tall, and it has United States Environmental Protection Agency on the front. I'm going, so there it is. And it dawns on me, I'm looking at this huge building and all the people that work there, and I'm wondering, I wonder what the carbon footprint on that building is. We're paying for employees and salaries and vacation, holidays and insurance and retirement. And then it dawns on me, we are paying those people to jack with our lives. I mean, it is unbelievable. In your Texas legislature last session, we passed a bill, you know, we have the TCEQ, Texas Commission on Environmental Quality. It's the second largest environmental regulatory agency in the world, second only to the EPA, if I remember the numbers right. And we passed a bill that says the TCEQ in Texas now does not get to promulgate a rule on industry without doing an industry impact analysis. If you're going to change something the way industry needs to do business, we're all for clean air, but let's calculate what that will cost the industry, because as you probably know, small business guy, free market guy, if you're going to force industry to spend money doing something, what's that going to cost? What's going to happen to the cost of their product or service? It's going to go up, isn't it? And who's going to pay for that? The consumers. So you know, I'm all for protecting our environment, but making energy darn predictable and keeping those stifling regulations to an absolute minimum as much as we can.
I'm sure you're going to have a different name for it, the Affordable Health Care Act.
Okay.
You know, obviously, you and others during the primary were the pledging of going along with the repeal pledge.
Yes, sir.
That was there. But beyond that, if that happens, then what? Are there parts of that legislation that you think maybe should stay? Or what should happen if a repeal does happen or an effort goes forward?
Right. This is probably one of the stark differences between me and my opponent in this general election. Lamson, of course, endorsed Obama. He has taken a lot of money from Nancy Pelosi into his campaign account over the years, I guess. Well, I'm not sure exactly what the time frame is. He's touting partisanship. You know, we need to don't be so partisan. We need bipartisan. He says he's the candidate that can work in a bipartisan fashion. Well, many of us will remember Nancy Pelosi's famous quote. You know, we got to pass a bill to see what's in it. 2,400 pages, give or take. We now know what's in it. You know, Obama, Pelosi and company, Lamson voted for Pelosi for minority speaker, leader of the House. They passed that bill all right over the hue and cry of 70% of Americans. You know, I was in the legislature when that was going on, and it was unbelievable, the hue and cry coming out. We need, oh, by the way, the vote was totally, if you remember, was all Democrats and only one Republican out of the entire Congress, the House of Representatives. So bipartisan, I'm not thinking that's real bipartisan. There are things that we want to see happen. The federal government, even though Obama, Pelosi, Lamson may believe that the federal government taking control of 1/6 of the nation's economy is a good thing, ask them how that's working on the post office. Ask them how hard on Social Security Congress has been. Medicare. When the federal government gets involved, the price automatically goes up because of the inefficiencies. We would like to, I don't want a panel of 15 people, what you've heard referred to as a death panel, 15 unelected bureaucrats getting between my mother and father. Dad's 87, mom's 82. He's one of the, I'm sure, one of the last surviving members of the greatest generation. He served in World War II over the Philippines. I don't want some unelected bureaucrat between them and their doctor making decisions. We need to make sure that we maintain the doctor-patient relationship. We need to see about making, this may be one of the few areas Congress has the legitimate purview in interstate commerce. They need to be able to buy insurance across state lines. There's some things that have got to change, but putting Obama, Pelosi, Lamson crew with their tax and spend record in charge of it, not so much.
Is there any portion of that legislation you think would work and stay in place?
I wish I could tell you I had read through the entire thing, but I guess I'm kind of like most people who have not read all 2,400 pages.
Actually, yeah, okay.
Yeah, you bet.
No problem. Won't hold you to recite every part.
That's pretty tough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's talk in general topics about federal budget.
Okay.
Your approach to taxes
Okay.
and your approach to funding for in the budget, your priorities, I guess would be the best way of saying. What are the priorities, and if there anything out there you'd say we just got to cut it totally.
Well, I don't think you can take that drastic of approach. I'm not there yet, obviously. In the Texas House of Representatives, Chairman Pitts, Jim Pitts, brought us as the state, in 2009, of course, we were sliding into recession. We knew we were going to have to cut. And I don't know if y'all know this or not, but in your Texas legislature, you think of it as a pie, the budget, there's, I think, 12 areas. And 2 of them are education, which is public ed, K through 12, and higher ed, which is junior colleges and above. They get 60% of the budget, okay? 60% of the budget. The other 10 areas, if you will, or if you just took education as one and left the other 10, they get 40% of the budget. When we knew the budget was going to be tight, we had to go area by area. You can go TxDOT, Transportation, Human Health and Service Commission, you can go Judiciary, and if I thought long enough, of course I wasn't on Appropriations Committee, I could come up with all the areas. You had to go, and your Texas legislature wound up where we didn't affect safety and security, DPS. There was 2 areas that we kept intact, which was security, because we had so many border problems. We figured if Texans weren't safe, if we weren't secure, then most other things paled by comparison. And the second thing was our seniors. We actually, the original budget took money out of nursing homes, we put it back. So we had to go area by area and prioritize. Jim Pitts walked out and put, I'll never forget, on the front counter for the day we started budget, which we started, as I recall, like at 9 o'clock Friday morning, and we gabbled in like at 4:20 or 5:20, gabbled out rather. Saturday morning was 20-something hours, right at. That budget was about this tall in terms of paper. And I can't sit here and tell you that the federal budget, I would know exactly which area I want to cut. But I will tell you this, as a small business guy growing up in this area, relating to the people, being a working guy, like I said we are, I always take that into account. Government's not the answer. This tax and spend model that we've been seeing for 4 years, how's that working for us? Is not the answer. And so I take that into account when I look at budget issues, and I say, as a regular working guy on the street or back in the neighborhood, how would I want this to be? And so when I get there and look at those areas, we will prioritize. I've got experience doing it not only in the Texas legislature, but as a business owner. I told you how hard things were starting my business. There were times when I went without paychecks to make sure my employees got paychecks. I'm used to making the hard decisions. Now, I'll contrast that to my opponent, who has been a politician. He was tax assessor collector for 16 or 18 years, 10 years in Congress. I've been building a business in this district for 31 years. I'm used to making hard decisions, while he's been what I would call a career politician.
And let me back up. It is budget related, but
Okay.
when we were talking about healthcare, I skipped over a sub-question with that, which is the University of Texas Medical Branch.
Yes, sir.
And its role. Obviously, there is its role for indigent and uninsured and the underinsured
Right.
population in the state and this region in particular. The county's taken on a bigger burden of paying, particularly in its indigent health care. But there's a lot of federal funds that come into UTMB, not just for its school program,
Right.
but also its healthcare program. And so how do you see the federal government's role with an institution like the University of Texas Medical Branch?
Great question. I have experience with that, and again, I'll go back to what my opponent's been trying to hang on me. I don't operate in a bipartisan fashion. 2008, September the 20th, you remember we got a visitor from it named Ike. Of course, it devastated the island, and of course, UTMB is the subject of this discussion. Craig Allen was the speaker pro tem back in my first session, 2009, 81st session. There was, I think, 18 of us became a Gulf Coast caucus, all up and down the Gulf Coast representatives, because there were state reps, and what comes to mind is John Smithy with House Bill 911 in Amarillo was trying to make it where we paid more money down here because we were closer to the coast. And that we actually, from the state standpoint, Smithy wanted to take money away from the coast. I think the comment was, y'all knew when you went to the coast, when you lived on the coast, it's hurricane prone, blah, blah, blah. And we said, look, insurance is spread out amongst the entire state. It's a whole pool. We went to bat. Craig Allen, you may remember, was Speaker pro tem. We put together a coalition, Republicans and Democrats. We funded to harden UTMB $200 or $212 million. I'm sorry, I don't remember the exact numbers. I've slept since then. We realized that it was critical. I think it's the number 3 trauma unit in this area. We needed it. Texas went to bat. We got it. I can work in a bipartisan fashion. I've got a track record of doing it. And I think it's critical. That part of this island is critical, and I was glad to see that we kept it. Federal government, when there's money involved for UTMB, it needs to step up to the plate and fund it. Texas pays in, we're a donor state. We pay a lot of tax dollars to Washington, D.C. We should get back in the appropriate areas some of that money that we pay in.
Who was your key Senate ally in that fight?
Was it Jackson? Of course, Mike Jackson, fortunately, I wasn't over on the Senate floor for all those debates. I'd have to go back and look at that bill. Now, remember, that was appropriations. We had to come back in and get that moved into appropriations. So I don't remember, Eber, to be honest with you. Yeah.
Going back to the budget discussion,
Yeah.
the federal tax code, what approach would you take?
Oh my gosh. We need a fair tax system. And that's one of the problems with Obamacare. I'll go back to, you called it that was the Affordable Patient Care Act.
Right.
I told you all today there was 4 letters in there. I was trying to remember what it was. And that's where I will fault my opponent for endorsing Obama, because that Affordable Patient Care Act not only is going to drive the cost of health care up, it added 17,000 IRS agents, as I recall. It puts a fee, the realtors were upset about it, puts a fee in to collect on the sale of real estate transactions, as I recall. You asked what all I knew about the 2,400 pages. It's going to drive taxes up. And the American public needs relief from the tax system the way it is. I'm for fair taxes, not for job-killing, strangling taxes like we have now.
Is there any particular tax code,
Tax
plan
model?
or tax model you would back?
There's been a lot of discussion about fair tax, flat tax. One thing's for sure, we need a fair tax system. Now, what does that look like? One of the things we did in the legislature was you looked at, anytime as a businessman, you look at the budget, you look at revenue, you look at expense, and you look at those two, the sides of the balance sheet. I'd have to get in the federal government, look at the balance sheet, look at what our tax code is now, look at if we changed it, what it would do. You learn to do that in the Texas legislature. So for me to say that I'd like to change a whole bunch of stuff over there without knowing the whole picture,
Okay.
I couldn't answer that.
How about, you have the experience with this in the state legislature, would you support seeing the federal government adopt like a sunset commission or something, as we do with agencies here, where a federal agency would have to come back and justify its existence or its funding every 12 years or so, just as the state of Texas does?
Yes. Sunset Review Commission.
Sunset Review Commission, right?
Look, let me add to that.
Sure.
Ronald Reagan once said, "There's nothing more permanent than a temporary government program." So when things get established. Well, an example in Texas would be, and I've heard this, I don't know the exact years, but the Telegraph Commission. At some point, they wound up doing away with the telegraph office. Now, I'm sure that they had defunded it and unmanned it, as it were, but it was still on the books, I'm told. And at some point, I don't know about y'all, but I haven't seen or sent a telegram in a long time. So at some point, agencies can become useless. And so 12 years is a long time in this day and age. You mentioned 12 years for Sunset Review. I'm not sure that it doesn't need to be more than that, sooner than that, more reviews. So yes, I'm in favor of a Sunset Review Commission, and we ought to look at every agency frequently and say, number one, are they needed? Number two, are they fulfilling the goals that Congress has set for them, the purview that they've been given? And number three, are they doing it efficiently? I think as a taxpayer's watchdog, and I have numerous awards in that regard, that's what we should be doing, looking after our constituents' money.
In your time in the State House, what legislation that you were part of either wrote the bill or co-sponsored are you most proud of, and what impact did it have?
House Bill 4009 in the 81st session was an anti-human trafficking bill, which protected the victims of human trafficking. A lot of people don't know this. Women and children, primarily women and children, most young girls. Just a little background. And that was a bipartisan bill, by the way. Worked together with Senator Leticia Van de Putte out of San Antonio. You may recall that in the 81st session, there was a lot of what was called chubbing going on at the end of the session. Those last 5 days, the Democrats were trying to kill bills, voter ID to be specific, that the Republicans had in the legislature. Things were crashing down. We were going to run out of time. Senator Leticia Van de Putte, who also likes to champion anti-human trafficking legislation, came to me, her office, and said, we're not going to be able to get our bill on the calendar. You have a bill that's ahead of ours on the calendar. We think yours is going to make it. Could we tack ours on? Could we partner up to get this done? And I said, yes, ma'am. And it didn't matter that she was a Democrat or that she was from San Antonio. It didn't matter that I was a Republican. I said, this is what's good. TJ, a lot of people don't realize this, don't know this. Texas has 25% of the nation's human trafficking. When they think of human smuggling, they think of international, people, women brought over from wherever, maybe Asia or somewhere. But the truth of the matter is, a lot of people come up to Texas primarily through the southern border, not just the southern border, but primarily from the southern border, and they come here to work, and they pay a coyote maybe $2,500 or $5,000. Sometimes I'm amazed at the money they pay to get here. And when they get here, the coyote or whoever brought them here will basically make a captive of them. Say, okay, you're going to have to pay me more than whatever we agreed on, $2,500 or $5,000, or I will have my friend kill your 12-year-old sister, rape and kill your 12-year-old sister back in Guatemala, Mexico, wherever, and they capture that girl, and they force her to do prostitution, and a lot of times they will shoot her up with the drugs, and you'll see them. I mean, we've got undercover officers that see them in the different bars and clubs and stuff. The average age of a girl pressed into the sex trade, I should say the youngest age, is 12 years old. Many 12 and 13-year-olds, and younger than that. But that's the average young person, is 12 years old. Of course, there's 14, 15, 16, 18, 20, 22, whatever. We passed a bipartisan bill that stiffened the penalties for those. It gave prosecutors in counties all across the state, well, really it gave all the law enforcement agencies the ability to take stiffer penalties and tools. It gave them the ability to go into some of these places. We redefined human trafficking, and we stiffened the penalties. If a person was caught with more than once doing this, boy, the penalties ratcheted up big time. And we made the sentences longer. So in essence, even though Texas has 25% of the United States sex trade, human trafficking, and by the way, that's a statistic we're not proud of, we don't want. We actually dealt it a blow my first session because we said, not in Texas, we're not gonna put up with this for our women and children.
All right, and your chance to make, well, before I ask this, any questions
I don't have
from
a
you guys or follow-ups?
I'm kind of curious about this. You mentioned earlier the difference between you and Mr. Lamson.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious because, to be perfectly honest, he's not all that popular in Galveston. What would be a significant difference between you and Ron Paul?
Well, I get asked that question, Patrick. What's the difference between Ron Paul and myself? Ron Paul is Ron Paul and Randy Weber is Randy Weber. He's conservative. I'm conservative. I think he's for less government, smaller government. I'm for smaller government. More freedom. He's for more freedom. Give Americans more of their tax dollars to spend. Let businesses, I mentioned earlier, let American entrepreneurs, you ask about the space industry, let them do what they do well, best, and that's be creative and create wealth. We might differ in some of the foreign policy issues, for example, but I have a track record in the legislature. What I encourage people to do, Patrick, is look at my voting record in the legislature. I really believe that I grew up in this area, and I mentioned earlier my business background, having built a business from scratch 31 years. Wife's from Leland, I'm from here. I grew up here. I really believe that I'm from here and I reflect the values of this area. So I think people just need to take Randy Weber for Randy Weber and look at his track record.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, and your last pitch, 3 minutes, no actual question, just
3 minutes.
your chance to tell folks, hey, this is why you need to vote for me.
We are at a critical time in our nation's country, TJ. 2 paths on November 6th, I do believe. As I move around through the community during this campaign and knock on doors and meet with people, I always ask voters one question. Are you better off now than you were 4 years ago? And resounding in this district is no. And they're scared for the future, the uncertainty that Obamacare is going to bring. And I agree with you, Patrick, that Lamson's not very popular in this area. The fact that he endorsed Barack Obama, the fact that we've got video of him on the floor of the House of Representatives where Nancy Pelosi says, we don't need your vote. If you want to change your vote, you can change your vote. We literally have a video of that. We have a video of Nick Lamson saying that he has spent $20 million to get his name ID out. And it hasn't been working. The voters have fired him twice. We've got video of him saying that, he'd still be there, career politician that he is, if they hadn't changed what the rules or the districts on him. I hardly look at myself 2 terms in the Texas legislature making $600 a month as a career politician. I think my conservative background, my business background, the fact that I'm a working man, the fact that I get it, the federal government needs to get out of our lives. We need to repeal Obamacare. We need to secure our borders. I am bipartisan. I've got the track record in the House. Mr. Lamson says he's bipartisan. Says he's for the working guy. He talks like he's from the Gulf Coast, but he votes like he's from the West Coast. Votes with Nancy Pelosi and company over 75–80% of the time. If he is so one of us, why did he vote against extending the Bush tax credits? Why did he vote against doubling the child tax credit? Why did he vote against putting troops on the border? I'm vice chairman of the Border Committee here in Texas. Now, again, Lamson talks like he's one of us here on the Gulf Coast, but he campaigns more like he's from the West Coast. If people want somebody that's gonna hang with Barack Obama and hang with Nancy Pelosi and continue the same tax and spend path for the next 4 years, they need to vote for Lamson. But if they want somebody that gets it, less tax, less government intrusion, wants to repeal Obamacare, doesn't want anything to do with Nancy Pelosi, they want a small business guy that's one of us, they need to vote for me.